Now you must be thinking, why am I making a video on a bunch of closed movie theaters? And well, I do think it's important to talk about them. It's important because cinema as an art form has been a part of India's culture for as long as I've known. And a very important component of that culture is celluloid film. And very recently, there has been like a rise in interest for celluloid film, 16mm, 35mm, 70mm. Now, IMAX has been the flag bearer of this format and the ones who have pushed the medium forward and made it so popular. And it's basically any cinephile's dream to watch a Christopher Nolan movie in a 1570 IMAX auditorium. But Indian cinephiles, and probably including you, are confused and frustrated as to why can't they have an experience like that in India? Why is it so hard to have a 70mm IMAX theater in India? Does nobody care in India to set up a theater like this? Well, that's not really the case. In fact, India had 5 such 1570 IMAX theaters back in the day in the mid 2000s, but they all closed down. What were these theaters and why did this happen? This is their story. Now, the chapter of IMAX in India has a very interesting origin, starting in 2001 at Wadala, Mumbai, where the first IMAX dome was open to the public. And this particular place has a very interesting history about how it was built, how it was converted and changed hands a couple of times, and finally its closure in 2023. Now, let's go a little further back. There was a company called AdLabs. Now, AdLabs was a company which specialized in film processing and post-production of Bollywood movies. If you ever bought a DVD or a VCD in the mid-2000s, you could probably find the logo on the cover. Founded in the 1970s by Mr. Manmohan Shetty and later taking over the reins his daughter, Miss Pooja Shetty, they were thriving at what they did, which was film processing and post-production of Bollywood movies, but they wanted to evolve, they wanted to expand, and they were setting their eyes into the multiplex. Now, during the late 90s and the early 2000s, multiplex as a culture was just catching on, and it was quite popular in the United States and other countries, but in India it was relatively in its infancy. And there were no key players, there were no big multiplexes as they are today. There are only small players in certain regions. PVR was thriving in the Delhi region, and they opened their first ever multiplex in Delhi in 1997. Now, AdLabs wanted to do something like that, but for Mumbai. And they also wanted bigger headlines for doing something different and being pioneers. So they built an IMAX in Mumbai. IMAX was a very different company back then. Like, they only had a few hundred theaters all across the world, including Australia and the US and the UK. So having something like this in Mumbai was basically like a world-class undertaking. And they had 2 offerings back then. You had flat screen IMAX theaters, and then you had dome IMAX theaters. The one in Wadala, Mumbai was a dome theater. Now, there are other domes as well, like you'll find in planetariums and science cities and amusement parks. IMAX domes are different than that. They're built differently and they operate differently. And to find out how they work, now, this is the original IMAX spec published by the founders of IMAX in 1983's SMPT journal, and it clearly states the exact auditorium configuration and design principles which go around making an IMAX dome and also flat screen IMAX theaters. Basically, the way an IMAX dome is different than a traditional dome is that a traditional dome is usually flat with concentric seating areas, and your entire ceiling is curved and your projector is in the middle, and you have to basically look up like this and hurt your neck when you're watching a presentation. But with an IMAX dome or an Omnimax dome, it's basically like a normal movie theater, except your seating is much more steeply raked. Your ceiling and your front wall, they kind of merge to account for the curved screen, the spherical screen. Now, the projection booth is in the middle of the seating gallery, and your projector is lifted off from the ground using a motorized slider, and it covers the entire screen using a fisheye lens, and it runs on the same 1570 IMAX format as do all IMAX theaters in the world. This was kind of like a rarity. There were only a handful of locations all around the world where an IMAX dome existed, including the Cinesphere Ontario in Canada, which was their first IMAX location. AdLabs basically brought such a world-class, esoteric movie-going experience to India and were basically the pioneers of IMAX in India. Now, this was like a 50 crore plus project. It was a behemoth, and rightfully so. They wanted to build their first multiplex and they wanted to do it right. And they also built 4 to 5 other screens, 35mm screens, to play Bollywood movies and Hollywood movies so that it could attract mainstream crowd. And yeah, the IMAX theater did not play Bollywood or Hollywood movies. It was only playing documentaries which were shot on the IMAX film and were optimized for the dome screen. Now, in the vast collection of IMAX documentaries which existed, only a few of them were actually designed for the IMAX dome. Most of them were always designed for the flat IMAX screens, and that is why they were more popular and more successful anywhere, any part of the world. So for the dome theaters, it was basically the same set of movies played over and over again. There was no fresh content. Now, IMAX did go ahead and release Hollywood movies on their format through an upscale process called DMR. Most notably, Spider-Man was one of those first films. It did play on the dome, but still, for some reason, the dome did not get as much popularity and it did not attract as many footfalls. So AdLabs was kind of like not focusing on it. They planned to not do IMAXs anymore, but still they were dead set on expanding and opening as many multiplexes as possible, and for that they needed money. And guess who funded them? Reliance. No, not Mukesh Ambani's, Anil Ambani's. Yeah. So the Reliance Anil Dhirubhai Ambani group, or Reliance ADAG, poured over 200 crore rupees into fueling their multiplex expansion projects, and they were opening multiplexes left and right in Mumbai, in Maharashtra, and other parts of the country as well. And they opened their first multiplex of the NCR in Ghaziabad, for which they partnered with another company and opened an IMAX there as well, which again closed. So that will be covered in an upcoming episode. But yeah, they were going left and right, opening multiplexes. But in 2008, something happened. Reliance decided to take over all of AdLabs' operations. They had a buyout. And yeah, they rebranded all of AdLabs' major multiplexes into Big Cinemas. And the IMAX at Wadala became Big Cinemas IMAX. And this was also an interesting time for IMAX because 2008 was when they launched their first digital-based projection system. Now, this was a departure from the 1570 format in terms of quality and also the kind of sizes it powers, but IMAX had to make a move because the entire world was going digital and they did not want to be left behind. So this was a pretty good opportunity, and the guys at Reliance or Big Cinemas, they saw it as a pretty good opportunity to convert the old dome, tear it down, and make it a flat screen theater with a 70-foot screen and the latest state-of-the-art IMAX 2K Xenon projectors. This was the moment where the multiplex actually became iconic. They played a bunch of iconic movies like The Dark Knight Rises, and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and a bunch of other movies, including Avatar, which had the most successful run over here. And because there were only 2 IMAXs at this point in India which were showing commercial films, anytime there was a big IMAX release, you would have these viewing guides in all worldwide locations, and Big Cinemas IMAX would be there representing the city of Mumbai. And from here on, Big Cinemas IMAX was actually like looking at a very successful long-term run until the suits at Reliance had some other plans. Now, Reliance's Media Works department, which was looking after all this, they had a very successful post-production and film processing business which they inherited from AdLabs, but the multiplex business, not so much. So it felt like a burden and they were already in a bunch of debt. So what they did was they basically took the entire Big Cinemas property and they sold it off to Carnival Cinemas for 710 crores. That's a lot. And all theaters which carried the Big Cinemas name would undergo and change their name to Carnival Cinemas. And with this, the Wadala IMAX had its third rebrand and it became Carnival Cinemas IMAX. Now this happened in 2014 and it kind of went all downhill from here. And why is that? Because Carnival did not do a good job in managing and operating the theater. There were no seat upgrades, there were no interior upgrades, there were no projector upgrades, no speaker upgrades, absolutely nothing. And there were sanitation issues too. The whole place was old and dirty and nobody wanted to go there. And there were complaints all over the internet. And meanwhile, there were other multiplexes, shiny new IMAXs opening up by PVR, Inox and Cinepolis. Having an IMAX was no longer a novelty anymore because everybody else was catching up. And this is where the public, the crowd of Mumbai wanted to go. Not Wadala IMAX, which was so old and dirty. And yeah, because of that, Carnival didn't even bother to maintain it and operate it properly. And also, Carnival Cinemas was not really a premium multiplex brand. They mostly focused on consumers with a budget in the tier 2, tier 3 cities of India. That was their main addressable market, not the posh crowd of Mumbai. Or like having an IMAX was never in their product portfolio. They just had it because it came with a contract and they were just lugging it along. And yeah, they had no choice but to wait it out until the contract expired. But credit where it's due. In 2018, something magical happened. Carnival Cinemas, in partnership with Warner Brothers, Paytm and IMAX, they held a 70mm engagement for Dunkirk at IMAX Wadala with Christopher Nolan in attendance. Yeah, it's crazy, but it actually happened. So I don't know the details as to why this happened or what, but Christopher Nolan was in India for spreading more awareness about the preservation of film, and there were some communities and organizations in India which helped make this happen. And IMAX did the good thing of organizing a 70mm engagement of Dunkirk in Mumbai, and it was a pretty huge thing. And tickets were going on sale for 2,000 to 6,000 rupees. It was pretty crazy. And one of my friends, Vikrant, was in attendance and he has documented the whole thing on Twitter, so you should check that out to understand how that experience was like. And yeah, after this, things just went back to normal. That was the last high point for Wadala IMAX, and one would think that Carnival might have been encouraged or could have had the idea to at least upgrade it to a laser theater or make some kind of upgrades to keep the theater up and running and more shiny, but they didn't do anything. The theater went back to normal, and in January of 2023, the entire place was officially closed. There was an official announcement, but there were no reasons to why this happened. If I had to guess, their IMAX contract just expired. It was exactly like 15 years from their original 2008 digital conversion. So yeah, that contract was up and they didn't want to renew it. So yeah, that was basically the story of Wadala IMAX. RIP. Now, I did visit the place last year just from the outside. I couldn't watch a movie, unfortunately. And yeah, it looked in a pretty bad condition, not gonna lie. Okay, so what's the moral of the story here? Well, A, never sell your company to Anil Ambani. Just kidding. But more importantly, is just the content and the interiors. That's all what the audience cares about. And this is one repeatable pattern you'll find in the upcoming episodes when I talk about the other IMAXs. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.